Good afternoon. My name is Ala McCoy. I am Director of Venture Development at the University of Maryland's Ventures, and I'm very happy to welcome everyone in our live session and everyone also who is watching the session as a recording on our Startup PMD YouTube channel. So thank you so much for joining us. We are recording this session and will be posted on our Startup PMD YouTube channel so you can review it later. So this workshop series is offered by Ventures in collaboration with Maryland Technology Enterprise Institute, or MTech, and Dingman Center for Entrepreneurship at the University of Maryland. Everyone in the live session, you are able to ask questions. So there's a Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. Feel free to submit any questions that you have, and our presenter will answer your questions throughout this presentation. If you see a question that somebody else answered and you like it, you can go ahead and promote it if you want the same answer, and we'll get those promoted to the top. But again, we are recording it and posted it on our YouTube channel. So if you would like to remain anonymous, you can submit your question anonymously. So today I would like to welcome Adam Coughlin. Adam is Chief Marketing Officer with York with York IE, where he leads the company's marketing efforts and its go-to-market advisory services practice. Adam works with startups on foundational messaging, content and communications, go-to-market strategy, website and digital marketing, revenue operations, and corporate storytelling. All of the things that I'm sure all of you are here to learn about. I am here to learn about that as well. So thank you so much, Adam. This is such a timely and important topic. We have a collection of aspiring and entrepreneurs who are already in business, ready to learn from you. So again, thank you. I'm going to mute my mic and turn off my video, and the microphone is all yours. And just everybody reminder, please submit questions.
Excellent. Thank you so much for having me. Appreciate it. I will just share my screen now. Oops. Excellent. Can everybody see that? I'm just going to go with, yes. I hope so. Yes. Thank you. Excellent. All right. Excellent. So thank you very much for having me. As Ala said, I'm Adam Coughlin from York IE. We're going to be talking about going from founder-led marketing to building a marketing machine in the early days of a company. I think this is a very timely topic because I think marketing in general is undergoing sort of a revolution right now. Whether you've done marketing for 30 years or you're new to marketing, everybody's kind of learning on the fly right now. So it's a really good, timely conversation. As we mentioned, I am a co-founder of a company called York IE. We try to help technology companies grow. We do that through two different ways. One, in investment side of our business, where we invest in B2B software companies kind of at the seed and Series A stage. And then we do, because we didn't want to just be investors, we wanted to help companies truly grow. We have an advisory services part where we do strategy and execution in kind of the functional areas of the business of R&D, go-to-market, and G&A. Obviously, go-to-market is marketing, which is sort of my background. I like to joke that I started working at York IE in kindergarten because that's when I met my colleague, Kyle York, for the first time. One of our other founders, Joe Raska, Kyle, and myself were all in the same Little League team together here in New Hampshire. We really enjoyed working together, but we weren't that great at baseball, so we had to come up with some other sort of skills. Now, I actually started my career as a journalist. So I was a reporter here in the United States. I lived in Beijing for several years. I lived in Italy for a period of time, and then ultimately came back to my native New Hampshire, where I transitioned from journalism and that kind of storytelling into marketing at a technology company called Dyn, which did the domain name system. So I was the first head of marketing communications for that company. Kyle, Joe, and Mike Vayu, the co-founders of York IE, we all worked there together. We grew that company to about 100 million annual recurring revenue, got acquired by Oracle. spent several years inside of Oracle Cloud Infrastructure, realized we didn't love working for a 150,000 person company. We liked working with startups. And so we founded York IE in 2019. This is a little bit of the topics that we'll cover, but probably best to just get into it. So when we're talking about marketing, we're talking about sort of like the three major channels of marketing, which are owned, earned, and paid. And I put them in that order because I think as you're beginning to try to build sort of your marketing foundation, that is the logical sort of a way to attack it, to start with owned, to then move to earned, and then ultimately move to paid. I say that because I talk to a lot of companies that start with paid. One of the reasons for that is obviously companies need leads. Thinking about starting with paid seems like an obvious thing to do because you can really kind of get some of the try to get the leads more quickly. The problem with that is you're paying to experiment, right? Like when you're starting off, you're trying to find the message, and that's why starting with that own channel. And in own, we're talking about your website, we're talking about social media, we're talking about email marketing. When we move to earned, we're talking about like, hey, you're not just saying it, somebody else is validating it, right? That is through the media, through influencers, through analysts. And then when you're talking about paid, you're putting dollars behind that message and trying to get it to reach more people. And so when I say like the message, this is really the most important foundational place to start as a company. It's amazing. Like I have talked with multiple companies who are fairly mature, and if you talk to their 5-person executive team and you asked each of them to tell you what the company did, you might get 5 different answers, right? And I'm a firm believer that every opportunity that you have is a brand building opportunity or a brand confusion opportunity, right? And if you within your own startup don't know how to articulate what you do, how can you expect anybody else to, right? And I'm a big proponent of a concept of marketing that we call drumbeat marketing. And as I mentioned earlier, I was started my career as a reporter, and I covered the New Hampshire primary, right? The first in the nation primary where we get a lot of political candidates that come to New Hampshire. And I talked to John Huntsman, the former governor of Utah and ambassador to China, who ran for president back in 2012, which just sort of dates myself. But he said in New Hampshire, you have to shake someone's hand 10 times before they'll consider voting for you, and then 10 more before they actually will. And that is very true of messaging as well. It's only when you are sick of saying it does it actually begin to resonate with anybody outside of your own office. And what happens with startups sometimes is they get a little bit of shiny object syndrome, right? They want to say this, they want to say that, they've said everything, but they're not known for anything, right? And I think all of you would agree with me when I say we live in a very noisy environment. Human beings, I believe, have an attention span that's actually shorter than a goldfish. And so you really need to like kind of pick something and kind of repetitively say it so that it can begin to be kind of percolated. And that's why it's really important, I think, to have this hierarchy, right, that allows you to start with the vision and the mission. Like, why does your startup exist? What's the problem you're trying to solve? What does the world look like in 10 years when you are successful? And like really understanding that is a great place to start because it begins to kind of lead credence to why you exist. And then you work your way down and you begin to understand, you begin to articulate the differentiators of why you're better than a competitor, the value that you're providing. But like in your early days as a startup, starting with that vision and mission is really important because that shouldn't change. Though as you begin to get more customer feedback, do more sales calls, et cetera, some of the differentiators, some of the value props, some of those things are going to evolve and change. So that's why starting with the vision and mission and like just getting that out there, getting feedback on that, understanding that you can be real consistent with it while you buy yourself time for some of the other things to sort of harden through experience. So like really like starting with that messaging and getting it out of your head. A lot of times, like a lot of this lives in the founder's head, which is great, especially in the early days when the founder is the primary marketing person, the primary salesperson. But as you continue to grow and add in new people, having a central source of truth so that they can like begin to build off of that same messaging. And now like your salesperson is saying it the same as the founder saying it. Now you're beginning to build that brand building opportunity instead of, well, now the salesperson says it's slightly different, the CEO saying it's slightly different, the CTO saying it's slightly different, and now we're just introducing confusion. These are just some resources I can share with Ala after to share with you guys. This is a template that we use to get that exercise of the messaging. And then this is a tool that we created that uses some of the generative AI tools to can even help you begin to just sort of start filling it out. Because I know from a creation standpoint, sometimes the most difficult thing is staring at that blank page, and it's easier to sort of work from something to begin with. And also like one of the troubles of, one of the difficult parts for the early stage founders, particularly if they're a solopreneur or it's just two people or whatever, sometimes it's easy to kind of get into that echo chamber and really use your vernacular. That's something that I see a lot on the messaging where people hey, we're a new category. We talk about these things very differently, and that's excellent. But like, if you're talking about things in a way that people aren't looking for, it's going to be really hard for them to find you. And I think that like one of the real struggles that a startup has is the balance between brand building and demand generation, right? As I said at the beginning, a lot of times people will default to the paid advertisements because they're really just trying to drive leads, because they have to drive sales and they have to drive revenue because, you know what I mean? They're either bootstrapping it or they fundraise, but they don't have an infinite timeline. And I understand that, but the problem with that sometimes is like, that creates a little bit more of a transactional environment, and you can dry up that well very quickly, right? And that's where the benefit of the brand building, can you build a brand? Can you build trust? Can you build relationships? Those are the things that are going to help you in your long-term success. But obviously you can't just do that alone because, like I said, it's not an infinite runway. And so how do you find that combination, right? And that's where I think just being smart with the execution strategy is really important, right? Which is why we like to begin with the owned channel, which I'll talk to a little bit more now here. I also like have the presentation pulled up. I'm looking at the deck on my screen. So if there's any questions, I can just pause for a second. If anybody has anything, feel free to jump in any of this setup prior to kind of going into the owned channel. So the good thing about from a marketing perspective is like there is like infinite things that can be done. The bad part is that there can be infinite things to be done, right? And it's hard to know like where should I start. So one of the places that I like to recommend starting is SEO content, right? We're talking about own, so we're talking about our own blog. This is good because we can create this. We don't have to rely on anybody else. SEO is good for two things. One, it's good to do the research on like what are people looking for? Because like one, if you can find something that people are looking for, that is a really good sort of a signal of urgency. right? Like, hey, they're looking because they have a problem. One of the hardest parts for being a startup is two things. One, like you obviously have sort of like pilot customers, design partners, betas, friends, you know what I mean? And you're showing them your product and you're talking about it and they're giving you feedback, and that can be really great. Um, but sometimes it's meaningless if you aren't asking them for money, right? Like I've had products that I've worked on before where everybody gave me great feedback until it was time for me to try to sell it to them. And then all of a sudden became tighter, right? And like a lot of times, like the other issue is like, oh, this is a really nice thing to have. Oh, this is in my top 10 list of problems, but it's not in my top three, right? And so like finding that urgency and that like that somebody is looking to solve this problem is really helpful. And like starting with search is a good spot because if they're searching for it, it means that it obviously resonates enough where they're looking for an answer. Search is also good because it helps you prevent that problem that I talked about, which is like you're only talking about it in your own way of viewing the world. If you start addressing search questions, people might be searching for something that the way that they're searching for it now, right? Like startups begin because they obviously believe that the status quo is not solving the problem, but it's usually the status quo that somebody's looking for. So if you can figure out, hey, this is how people are looking for it, I'm going to create a piece of content that answers that question of how they're looking for it, but then through that piece, convert them into the new way of thinking about it. That's the best way to kind of begin to get some traction, because otherwise, if you just write it from, hey, this is the way you should think about it, if nobody's looking for it, it's going to be really hard for them to find it, right? And then lastly, the other good thing about search is that it's very tangible and trackable, right? You create a piece of content, you can look through some of these tools like Moz and SEMrush. Okay, where am I ranking for this? And then, okay, through optimization, through efforts, am I moving up higher in the ranking? Because in the early days, it's really hard to like, hey, was that blog super beneficial? Was that the right piece? Was that the wrong piece? Starting with the SEO really begins to give you some tangible things that you can track, which then gives you feedback and then helps you continue to improve. And then obviously on this side, there's some nice blog generation tools that exist to get you that first draft. And here's the real question, right? Like all startups are resource constrained. The good thing when I was talking about that revolution from a marketing perspective is that there are some of these AI generated tools. I think these AI generated tools from a marketing perspective can be really helpful to get that first draft going. But we're seeing that like through all of the things like Google search and all of the different sort of algorithms and stuff that exist out there that like just straight like cut and pasted from ChatGPT are not going to be ranking well. So there really needs to be the manual input, the subject matter expertise that you all have to put into it. But again, they can be a good framework to get you started because as the founder who's trying to scale the marketing, I understand how many things that are on your plate. So moving from like SEO, I think that's a great place to start. I think that social media is an excellent place to start, and I think LinkedIn is. My philosophy on LinkedIn for early stage startups is to start with your own personal LinkedIn. That's where that conversation around the vision and the mission can be really helpful. Start posting on that, getting feedback. The reality is, right, there's always the analogy that a startup is like a baby. Obviously, a baby has less of a network than an adult, which we all are. And so our personal networks are obviously much bigger and more fruitful. And can we cultivate them and then convert them into becoming an audience of the company, right? Oftentimes we start by posting all of this stuff on our company pages, but neglecting our own personal pages. And that becomes sort of like hey, we've posted, you know, like the old field of dreams, if you build it, will they come? Not necessarily. And so starting with your own personal pages, get some sort of an interest, get the conversation going, and then convert them into your own following. And then creating a newsletter is a really nice way to take some of the content, whether that be from the blog, whether that be from the social, and begin to create a sign up. So you have a nurture list of people that you can begin to on a regular basis keep nurturing. And as we were talking, Ala and I were talking about prior to this, we were saying, oh yeah, some people will come to this webinar, some people will just consume it later on their own sort of schedule. And that's where the reality of like that drumbeat philosophy is like, you got to keep hitting people over and over again, because just because you posted on social or just because you posted in your blog doesn't mean they saw it at that point. And that's where like a newsletter gives you another vehicle of which to take some of the work that you're doing and hit people again with the chance, increasing the chance that it gets seen. And like, I'm a huge proponent of sort of like a KPI, like, hey, if I'm going to do something once, I want to get 7 sort of touch points out of it, right? So that's where we like to sort of start with that message that we're trying to get across. And that's actually a really another big a point to get across is like the integrated nature of marketing. A lot of times I will talk to, experienced marketing leaders, and they'll share with me sort of their marketing plans. And it ends up being a lot of like channels. Hey, here's what we're doing for media relations. Here's what we're doing for social. Here's what we're doing for email. And not necessarily like, hey, here is the theme. Here is the message. Here's the unique point of view to our unique ICP that we're trying to get across. And then we understand that people digest and consume information through different channels. And so we're going to take that message, we're going to take that theme, and we're going to then slice and dice it up into different bite-sized bits of consumption so that the people can then consume it however they consume information. If you let the tail wag the dog, you end up creating all of these channel-specific messages, and then you've introduced sort of 12 versions of yourself, and it's a lot more work. If you do it the inverse and you say, here's the message, here's the blog, here's the piece of content that I'm going to create, and then I'm going to slice and dice it up into a separate blog post, several LinkedIn posts, a piece for email outreach, a piece for my newsletter, then you feel like, hey, I've hit all of these channels, but I've hit them trying to get across that same message. And then hopefully that bubbles up, and then I begin to be known for the message that I wanted to be by that audience. And that's where some of those sort of AI generated tools that I talked about before can be really helpful. Like, hey, spend a lot of work making sure that you have that right message, you have that really nice anchor blog post that you want to do, and then you can use some of those tools to slice and dice it up into really small bite-sized assets, which then allow you to post on a more regular basis. Hey, now you've put out a LinkedIn post once a week for a month, all promoting that original blog post, and now you're increasing your chances of hitting people. I just got introduced to this concept the other day called the Great Ignore, which is like where we talk about things like outbound marketing, right? Where we're trying to like reach out to people, and that's also a sales tactic. And we did that through we've done that historically through a lot of emails and phone calls. But then when the automation tools became prevalent, that was kind of like an easy button. And then we just smashed the easy button over and over and over and over again to the point where now people completely ignore them. And what we need to do now to generate new leads and revenue opportunities is to regain trust and build relationships, right? And one way to do that is through validation and audience, right? Those are sort of two things that are relevant to every startup, right? You are new, right? And so it's very difficult to validate why somebody should take you seriously. Some ways to do that are the experience of the founding team. Others is the advisors that you work with. Others are the investors, right? These are all kind of signals of like, oh, this company should be taken seriously because of X, Y, and Z. Then the other thing that we talk about is the audience, like who are you talking to? That's one of the reasons that we said we should start with your own personal channels on LinkedIn, because you have an audience. Well, other organizations and institutions have audience as well, right? That is one of the reasons that media relations is really has historically been effective, because like the media publication has an audience of prospective prospects. So by getting covered in there, you are doing two things. One, you have been validated by the media reporter that you are, mature enough, worthy enough as a company to be covered. And two, you are then exposed to their audience, which is great. But that is why I want to start with owned, because you have just been exposed to that audience. You are sort of renting that audience. You want to try to convert them to then an audience of yourself. To do that, you need to have a certain level of owned media or owned channels going, so that they then have something to follow, right? I've talked with a lot of founders in the past that were like, "Hey, Adam, I want to get into Forbes," and I'm like, "Do you really?" Like, let's just say that that happened. You got a nice article published about you on Forbes. A prospect looked at the article. They were like, "This company seems interesting." They then went to your website and found that that was, outdated or not fully completed. They went to like your LinkedIn and they saw that you haven't posted in 6 months. They tried to read a blog, but there isn't a blog, right? Like you only get so many chances at getting that introduction through some of these earned ones. That's why it's really important to have that foundation of own set up, so that when you do get it, you have this whole relationship that you can then build with the prospects. The sort of like landscape of earned is changing, right? Like it used to be, TechCrunch had the audience, and it was so important to get in. Like there was a period, 10, 15 years ago where if you got put on TechCrunch, you'd have to worry about your website being crashed. That's not necessarily the change anymore. And now it might be something like a single person in your space has a great following and great reputation. And that's the influencer that you want to get validated and exposed to the audience, right? But the other good thing about the influencer, excuse me, from the earn channel is like you have this message that you want to create, that you want to resonate. You've put it out through your own channels. You've gotten feedback, whether that be engagement on social media, views of the blogs. You kind of feel like, hey, this message is resonating. If you can go to earned and you can have somebody else validating it and saying, yeah, like the way that you're approaching this problem is interesting. The value that you're providing is interesting. Your story as a company or as a founder is interesting. I'm writing about it. That should give you a lot of really good confidence to then move into that next thing that we talked about, which is the paid. But again, the other thing that's really good about the earned is taking that point of view and trying to make it really like unique, and thinking about, right, like one of the reasons, like when I started my career, as I mentioned before, my background was in journalism, which was really good because like I knew what a good story looked like, right? And when I started working at that first company, Dine, they would say like, "Oh, hey, Adam, like this should be a news story." And I was like, well, it's really just about us. It's not really like newsworthy. And so like if you can think about like, hey, what is the relevance of this beyond just being good for us and like valuable to the community, valuable to the ecosystem, valuable to the earned outlets, that'll help kind of up level the stories that you're telling, so they're not just so myopic and just about yourself, but more about the people that you're trying to talk to, which again I think will influence and help all of the marketing. And there becomes a moment in marketing too, where in those early days when we're talking about validation, you have to manufacture that. You don't have a ton of customers. You don't have a ton of external parties that are talking about you. And so you have to be bold enough to sort of shout from the rooftops and talk about why you matter. But then there's a moment where you can flip, where you have customers and you have people that are willing to speak on your behalf. And that's really an exciting moment, and one that you really want to double down on. The best marketing that you can do is when other people are doing your marketing for you because you've created happy customers that want to tell your story. So then that third channel that we talked about is really like the paid. And paid just like, you know, it feels really good when you feel more confident because you've kind of taken that message and you've run it through the owned and the earned channels. During that effort, you've kind of like narrowed down a little bit more as who is the ICP and who is going to want this. Then you can kind of say like, okay, I kind of feel confident about these things. Let me go throw some kind of gasoline on the fire by putting it through some of the channels. And again, the reason for that own to earn to paid is like through the paid, you are going to need assets, right? Whether that be you're paying to have an ebook promoted, you're having a webinar promoted, even if you're just doing sort of like LinkedIn ads, you want to have the graphics and all of those different things. And here I recommend trying to learn, right? So starting small, the balance here is like enough budget where you can actually learn something, but not too much where, you know, you're being frivolous or just lighting the money on fire, right? And I think that's where, you know, from my investor side of it, like over the last few years, we've seen the change in the startup landscape in general, right? Historically, venture capital particularly was a growth at all cost model where people were spending 120% of their revenue on go to market. And it was like, how fast can we grow? How much money can we spend? Where there's been a real shift in dynamic where pragmatic companies that are growing, but doing so in an efficient, thoughtful, smart manner are the ones that are becoming the most attractive. And taking that approach to a paid perspective is really important. And, you know, I've talked with companies that spend too much, I think, without doing some of the due diligence on the paid. And then I've spoken to other companies that guard each dollar a little bit too closely and actually need to open it up a little bit and try and fail. But there isn't really failing if you're learning from it, honing in on it, and being able to sort of make your next decision smarter. I think everything that I talked about previously, a lot of that can be done by the founder. But I obviously also understand that founders have a ton of things on their plate. I've talked to founders who said, hey, listen, I do my marketing at 4:30 on Friday afternoon, which is when I can get to it. That can be really hard to have the consistency that's needed. Fortunately, there is some automation and tools that can allow you to schedule some of those things out. So even if you're working on it at a chunk, you can have it kind of be deployed over a period of time. But then there comes the point with all of these things, which is like, hey, we need to have somebody that's focused on this particularly, right? So who is the right sort of hire from a marketing perspective? For the early stage, I tend to like sort of a generalist, somebody that is a self-starter and scrappy and willing to try things and can do across all of those things. Like, you know, marketing teams typically as they scale, that owned, earned to paid kind of becomes different orgs. And people become vertically specialized in those orgs, right? You have PR people, you have people that do only paid programs on the paid side of it, or people that are PPC experts. What you're looking for in that early days is that sort of junior level person that can be horizontal, can really think about marketing, can really just make the consistency and the reporting and the metrics. And that's like one of the most crucial parts at the early stage, creating that foundational layer of reporting. Because you're going to be in such experimental mode, you have to be able to make sure that you're tracking so you know what's working and then how to continue to improve. And then obviously, like, you know, more resources can be helpful. It's really helpful if you have that generalist marketing person that's thinking about what you're doing, is able to create those integrated campaigns, track all of them, but then you can supplement that through freelancers, agencies, et cetera, to maybe help on some of the execution on some of the different components of that approach. So to sort of summarize, um, oh, um, is really like just I guess that was the summarized slide. Sorry. Just that sort of like when it comes to engineering and product, a lot of times it's very deliberative. You have roadmaps. With marketing, marketers are historically notorious for like just adding stuff to the plate. And I think in the early days of a startup, having that strategy, moving from kind of owned to earned to paid in a thoughtful manner is the best way to sort of build traction and truly grow out that success. So that's the end of the sort of formal presentation. I can stop there, and I'm happy to answer any questions if we have anything, or if anybody's dealing with any thing from their end. Happy to talk about specific examples too.
Thank you so much, Adam. That was really very helpful. Regardless of whether you're running a business, it was very helpful for me running a university program.
Yeah, and to
Yeah.
that point too, it's like whether it's a business or everything that I just talked about, even from the messaging hierarchy to the owned to the earned, works for our own personal branding as well too, right? And that's like one of the things that we see is like, people don't spend 40 years at the same job anymore, right? Like having an individual brand uh, is really important for both yourself personally, but also as if you're somebody that wants to start a company, right? Because like oftentimes a founder and a company are synonymous. And so the bigger the personal brand that founder has, the bigger personal brand um, that startup will then have access to from the beginning, right? And so that personal brand building is really important.
Yeah, thank you. If anybody has any questions, I see a hand raised. I can go ahead, go ahead and talk.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Coughlin. My company is it's a portable hand washing station, which it's on the market already. Now, what separates mine from what is on the market is the difference in operation. Mine is hands-free, portable hand washing station. You don't need the foot pumping to operate it. And I just set up the company. I have done the first prototype and working on the second prototype, which involves the mechanics of which makes the user be able to use it without the foot pumping. And my target market is the veterans and also the military. So my question is, how do you market a product that is being modified, a product that is already on the market, but a unique idea? I have had the unique idea to make what is on the market better.
Yeah, excellent. And I think that goes back to my point a little bit about that hierarchy. And right, like, so obviously, like, you're talking about a physical product. When you talk about software products, like they are always evolving and always improving. And so, I think like for you, what I would be really interested in is the point around that differentiation, right? Like not having the foot pedal, not needing that.
Yes.
That would be the thing that I would want to get a bunch of testimonials for about why is that um, so sought after and needed, and like, you know what I mean? And I think the other thing too, from a marketing perspective, and I often use this analogy, is like before Henry Ford could tell you all of the values of the car, he sort of had to beat up the horse a little bit, right? And kind of like articulate the shortcomings of that mode of transportation. So as much as it's like, hey, like this, you obviously looked at this market, you saw that there were these portable hand washing stations that existed, but there was a flaw in them that wasn't either servicing a certain segment of the population or was causing different problems. And so it's like kind of like spending some time in a nice way pointing that out so that you begin to like get people to think about that mindset of like, oh yeah, like, oh, why do they have to have that? That is like not necessary, right? Because I think the number one competitor of every company is the status quo. It is much easier for a buyer to do nothing than to change. And so we have to like be compelling, and that's the role marketing can play, which is like, how do you compel them either through like opening their eyes to like how bad the current situation actually is, or opening their eyes on like how much better their life could be in the new situation.
Thank you very much. In terms of hiring a marketing person, since this is a startup, obviously I don't have that money. It's a pre-revenue company. So would it be a good idea to hire like a senior in college through the marketing department, like kind of make it like an internship or a part-time for a marketing student, since you pointed something out like a junior level
Yeah.
Person, and because you want somebody who is eager to also make a name for themselves, or like my mom always say, who has fire in their belly.
Yes, exactly. I think that as long as you, as the founder, create sort of that strategy from a marketing perspective, and that is like, what is the theme? What's the message? What's the unique point of view that we want to be known for? Then having somebody, whether that be through an internship program, or having that hungry person that can then go take that strategy and go execute against it, leveraging, you know what I mean? Again, that's where like the power of some of these tools can be helpful to create that calendar of consistency. That is the key, right? One of the things that happens a lot of times on marketing is people will be like, marketing is important, and they'll write 5 blogs and they'll do 6 social posts, and then none of the blogs go viral or the social posts don't go viral. And then they say, oh, I'm super busy, I'll go do this. And then 6 months later, they come back and they go, you know what? That was important. I should do that. And it's like, it's much better to do less, more consistently. And that's where I think if you can kind of come up with that framework, the sort of like, hey, this is what we want to get across, have somebody, even if they're just doing it part-time, just kind of put together the sort of tactical execution plan, and then they can go execute it on it, and you will slowly build up momentum, which I think will be the best path towards success.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, no, I just also, and for everyone, I just posted a link. So Dingman Center for Entrepreneurship is offering fellowships where they can partner students who are willing to work or want to work at a startup with a nascent startup, and there's a way to apply for both students and companies. So I posted a link. Obviously not a guarantee, but you should definitely look into applying.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Thank you now for great questions. We have another question from Lord. How do you balance between the need for a niche and the need for increased revenue?
Well, I have heard somebody that said before that the riches are in the niches. So I think you could have both, right? And I think that like from like an investment standpoint, we love vertical SaaS, essentially like companies that have a horizontal platform that could work in a lot of industries, but they're just going to say start in um, pest management. And like the benefit of that is that it's a very targeted um, uh, audience that you can identify, like how do we go to them, how do we get in front of them, and it is fairly niche. Um, in doing that, you will begin to build sort of the machine and understand what works. And then at that point, once you know sort of like what works, you can then diversify and now go to another vertical or another industry or another space, but not like so sort of blindly trying things. It's more of like, here's a playbook that we're going to now replicate. And that can be done via industry, that can be done via geographic location. I love companies that, you know, hey, we're gonna create a playbook of how we're going to enter Washington, D.C. And we have all of these sort of marketing tactics that we're going to do. And then we're going to then replicate that in Philadelphia and then New York and kind of roll it out that way. It's very hard, particularly for early stage companies, to kind of go too wide because it's hard to actually get any sort of traction. And like I'm a marketer, and so like even things like product-led growth, where they sound like, oh, I just have to put the product out there and then it's going to do the marketing for me. Like even all of those companies that are like the poster bearers of like what a product-led growth company are usually have like giant go-to-market machines behind them that are helping do that.
Yeah, thank you. A quick question. So you mentioned blogs and other content distribution platforms. Do you have any particular ones that you recommend, either embedded in the website or something like WordPress or something else?
Yeah, I think from a blog perspective, we're big fans of WordPress, and uh, now it's just completely escaping me because you asked. WP Engine, which is like a hosting service on WordPress that gives like some of the support and everything like that. What we found with WordPress is that it's great because it has all these different integrations. Um, um, but it's also like easy enough for even people like me, the non-technical marketing folks, to be able to you know, publish and make changes to the website, make changes to that, and that's like part of it too from a um, sort of like I talked about the own to earn to paid. I'm also like a big proponent of sort of like the brand building, get the content out, get some traffic to your website. Usually to begin with, your website is kind of like a piece of marketing collateral. It's just sort of like almost like a one pager that articulates your value and all of these different things. But eventually, as the traffic begins to come to that website, you want it to evolve into a conversion engine because you want to be able to capture all of those people. And then once you've got traffic and you're capturing them and you're doing things like landing pages and more of the sort of like demand generation side of it, that's where then that sort of tech, GTM tech stack, your HubSpot or your Salesforce is really important to understand, like, are you tracking everything? Do you have reports? Do you know what's working? And so it's again, just a thoughtful approach to all of those things. And a lot of times people like just spin up stuff. They'll spend a lot of money on HubSpot, but they won't actually have anybody that necessarily knows how to use it. And I've seen, you know, that happens all the time because, you know, startups are notorious for moving very fast.
Yeah. Well, we're waiting for more questions, so you can either submit them via the Q&A or just raise your hand like Na did, and I'll mute your mic. But I'll ask maybe the next question is, what are your thoughts on newsletters? Often I see startups collecting names for the newsletters. Some of them do send those newsletters, some of them don't. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I think newsletters, again, like my opinion on everything is consistency is better than quantity, right? A lot of times people will be like, oh, I got to do a weekly newsletter, and that becomes really difficult to keep up. right? So even if it's something as simple as a once a month, the benefit of the newsletter is that it gives you that um, CTA of like, hey, give me your email address, right? And then once you have the email address, you can nurture the relationship and grow the database and all of those different things. And then, as I mentioned, like that integrated, like, don't think of the newsletter as just like a separate channel that you need to do all this original stuff for. Like, can be a great opportunity to repurpose and reuse some of the things that your assets that you're already existing and already creating, but then just giving another distribution channel in the hope that that could be the thing that keeps people top of mind. The key that like what we need to do is like everybody's busy, everybody's thinking about a million things. Even like from a York IE perspective, like, you know, and that's where that drumbeat philosophy came from. People will be like, oh, I didn't even know you did this. And it's like, oh, well, I've only talked about it every day for 5 years. And yet you still haven't heard about it because, you know what I mean? Everybody's worried about their own stuff. And you just have to keep coming up with creative ways to stay top of mind with people. And so a newsletter can be a good way of doing that too.
Yep, thank you. I've also noticed LinkedIn now has these topics that they ask experts to comment. So I sometimes get invited to comment to those. Are those, does somebody read, do people read them? Are those valuable?
Yeah, I think a couple of things. One, to my point about validation, right? Like answering those sort of questions by being asked by LinkedIn is a good validator, and that sort of you know, usually they're like a collected piece of like different people's, and that can be really nice to see who those other people are, and then that's an opportunity to then go network with them and try to be exposed to their audiences. The other thing is like that's where I was kind of going with like the SEO, which is like, you know, LinkedIn is a huge amount of data. If something is bubbling up to the point that they want to ask a question about it, it means people are thinking about it. And that's a good topic to become talking on, whether you're doing it directly through theirs or like your own post or a blog post. You know, oftentimes like, and I fall victim to this, I come up with ideas of content. And it's like, does anybody care about that idea but me? So like using the market to sort of pull you into what you're talking about can be a way to make sure that you're, you know what I mean, talking about topics that might actually resonate.
Yeah, thank you. Does anybody else have any questions? I know I got a request to connect with you, and I'll just send you that person's email address.
Yeah, please. Yeah, I'd love everybody's email address. Love to follow up. You can follow me on connect with me on LinkedIn. It's just Adam Coughlin. Happy to be a sounding board for you. I know a lot of the people on this have been in the early days of a startup. You're doing something, thinking about it. One of the most exciting periods you can be in. Also, one of the most overwhelming. And sometimes it can be good to just have a sounding board. So happy to be helpful in any way we can.
Yep, thank you.
Awesome.
Well, thank you very much. Does anybody else have any questions? Last call for questions. If not, I'd like to thank Adam. Thank you so much for this great session. I will post it on Startup UMD YouTube channel. You can watch it there again, and for those who couldn't join us, you can catch it there. And we'll try to get Adam back for a follow-up session if you have any suggestions or specific questions on a specific topic that Adam discussed. We can ask him to come back and do that session as well. So
My pleasure.
thank you so much, Adam. This has been fantastic.
Thank you, and wishing everybody continued success.
Thank you.